All right, welcome back to the next file with the Working with Excel chapter. We are in file 5, and we're probably going to cover file 6 in this video as well. I might do 6P1 in a separate video. We'll see. We'll see how long the video goes. So I want to show you how to loop through a worksheet in openpyxl. And I think one of the best ways to wrap your head around that is just to do a quick review of for loops in general. So this is not using anything with openpyxl. This is just a review of for loops, which you should already know at this point. I just want to do a quick refresher on that. So let's say you have a list like this. We could do a for loop if we wanted to print everything out inside of there. And we could say for the string or word, whatever you want to call it, for word in example list, print the word. Okay. So it looks like that. Okay, it's just going one by one through each element inside of our list. Each element, one by one, becomes the word variable. And we just print that out one by one until there's nothing left in the list. Okay. You can also have a list like this. So we have example list 2 for sublist and example list 2. And what you'll notice is that this outer list only has, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So it has 3 elements, but each one of those elements is itself a list. So if I were to print them out, print sublist, like that, I'm going to be printing out an entire list, right? So if I were to do this again, let me just create a separation space. Let's do this again, but I want to print out the first element of each inner list. So I want to print out first, second, and third. So I'm going to get a list each time I'm looping through this. Like here, I printed out something 3 times, but I want to get the first element within each of those inner lists. So if I want the first thing, I can just use brackets and use the index of 0. That'll give me the first thing. I can run through that. So you can see I'm getting first, second, and third. So I'm only looping 3 times still, but I can choose which of these things I want to grab out from under those. I could also do something like this, but let's say I want to print out literally everything inside of this list. I could then do for elements in sublist, print element. And let's fix that right there. And I'm also going to put a blank printing right there just to separate it out. We can run through that again. So if I do this, it's going to say first list inside list, first list inside list. Then I'm to my second inner list, second list inside list. And I can access every individual thing inside of those, right? So hopefully that's a good refresher of nested lists and how that works with printing things out. So the thing we're going to see once we jump over to file number 6 is that you can think of worksheets like a list of rows, and every row has a list of cells, right? So if I were to open up, let's see, do I have one like this? So it's almost like if we wanted to loop through a sheet, we could loop through each one of the rows. And when we're at a specific row, like let's say we want to look at row 2, we can then loop through each individual cell, one by one like that. So it's essentially an example of a nested loop. So let's go over to here. Let's see, we're going to import the mock grades, which we worked with in the last file. It looks like this. We just have name, grade, so names and grades here with a few different sheets over here. Let's go back to file, where are we at? File 6, okay? So OpenPyXL gives us a nice way to loop through a specific sheet, and it's this .iter rows. So we're gonna try and do that. So we're gonna say for row in the current sheet, and the current sheet is just storing external workbook.active, so whatever the active sheet is. So if you have a sheet object, you can just do .iter rows like that. and that'll give you each row one at a time. So let's just try printing it out and see what that looks like. It's not going to be very useful yet, but we can see what it's looking like. Okay, so you can see what it's giving you is a tuple, and remember a tuple is just a list that you can't change. It's immutable. You can tell it's a tuple because it has the parentheses. So we have a tuple, and it has two elements inside there. And it has two different cell objects. One is A1, one is B1, then A2, B2, so on and so forth, right? So let's say we wanted to look at what those values were. You could actually, as one of the parameters inside the iteros method, you could say, hey, I want to give the parameter of values only the argument of true. Now when I run this, if I do it again, it gives me the actual values of these cells. Rather than giving me the entire cell object, I get the values, which is often really, really useful. So let's say we want the same thing as what we just saw, but we don't want them returned as tuples. We want them returned as the individual values. So we could do this one. I'm going to do clear screen. And that's a function I'm importing. That's just going to clear it just to save space. Now I run it, nothing's displaying. Let me do the same thing as above. But I'm going to say for cell value in row, print the cell value. So now I can see every individual cell's value within this sheet one at a time, rather than getting at the entire row all at once. Okay. So you can also just get the cell object and access value and everything else. So let's do the same thing, but do not use values only. For every cell, print out the coordinate and then what the value is. So let me copy and paste this. I'm going to get rid of values only equals true, because the default, if I were to hover over this, see values only, the default value is false. So it's essentially as if I had said, hey, values only equals false. That's what the default value for that would be. So when I get a row, the cells are no longer values, they are actually cell objects, right? So you can name this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it cell object to remind me of that. And let's get a few things out of this. Let's say the value of cell, let's say cell object dot coordinate is cell object dot value. So now let's run this and see what it looks like. Okay, so the value of cell A1 is name, of B1 is grade, A2 is William Miller. So awesome. We're getting every individual value from the current sheet, but because we're getting the cell object, we don't just have access to the value, we have access to anything else that we want, right? Because cell object has a bunch of attributes and methods attached to it, and so we get access to all of those if we leave out values only. So it just kind of depends when should you use it. If you ever want to change a value, you should not use values only. And if you want to get access to extra stuff like coordinate, you should not use it. But if all you want to do is display values, then using values only is totally fine. Okay, let's see here. Let's specify a subsection. Okay, let's use iteros again. In fact, let me just copy this. We can just use the same loop. But iteros also lets you specify a few other things. Lets you specify a min row, min column, and max column. Okay. So let's say I want to skip the first row. I don't want to see the name and grade. I just want to see the data after that. So let me do clear screen so nothing displays at first. Let's say I want to say the minimum row should be 2. So if I were to do that, then when I run this, notice it's going to skip A1 and B1. and it just starts at A2 because it skipped that first row, row 1, right? Let's say I want to only go for the I want to start at row 2, but I only want to go to row 4. Let's say 4. I could do that, and then it will stop at that point, right there. Let's say I only want one of these columns. I could say, let's say I want to start at row 2, and I only want row 2, so I could say max row also equals 2. Then when I run this, oops, min row, I meant column. Min call. Let's try this one. So now we're only getting column B. We're only getting rows starting from 2 going up to 4. So we get 2, 3, and 4, but we're still just getting column B. So we get C minus, A minus, and A. So you can use iter rows, but get a subset just by specifying the min rows and the max rows. And all of these values are inclusive. So it will get row 2 and also keep row 4. You can also do something similar to this. Let's just copy this. And rather than using current sheets, iter rows like this, you could also, in fact, just do something like, let's say we have our current sheet, and we want to get B2 to B6. This should also work just fine. Yep. So iter rows kind of lets you specify things like that, lets you do the values only. But this also works just fine for doing loops. So with that, let's just do this looping problem in the same file. I think that's totally fine. So after going through this and following through with this, see if you can read through this problem and do it on your own. Let me read through the instructions right now. If you're in class, I would pause and try to have you do this by yourself. I'd recommend you pause at home as you're watching this and try and do it on your own, and then you can just play the video and watch me go through the solution. So in this file, we want to import the same mock grades file that we've been working with, but we want to change the grade of anyone with a C minus to be an F on the active sheet. Save the results as a new workbook called example 6. And then if you can successfully do that, then alter your code to change C minus to F on all of the sheets. So not just the active one. Save the results to example 6. So let's go for this. First, we need to import openpyxl, and we need to load our, we can call it whatever we want. I'll call it external workbook equals openpyxl dot load workbook. We can copy the relative path if we want. Okay, and then let's see, we just want to loop through the active worksheet, right? So we can say for row in external workbook active sheet, we can do iter rows. Okay, we want to change the grade, and we could say, we could loop, there's a few different ways you could do this. We could loop through every individual cell, but if we look at mock grades, we know that grades only are in column B, so it's probably not even worth looking at the other one. So we could even make use of some of those min and max ones. So let's say minimum column is 2, max column is 2 also. You could actually probably leave out max column because that's the end of the file anyway. That should work. Then we are going to get a row, and that's going to have multiple cells within it. We can say for cell object in row, if cell object dot value. So if the value of this one is a C minus, is that what I said? C minus. And we need to make sure we use 2 equals. Then let's change that cell object's value to equal an F. So let's do that. We're going to check every row in there, and then we're just going to save this. Let's save it as example 06.slsx. Okay. So let me actually even set a breakpoint, walk through this. Okay, so we're going to load this in. We should get row, which is only contains a single cell here. It still gives us that inside of a tuple. So we need to access. We could actually make this a little bit more efficient, but this should work just fine. We could get rid of the loop because it only has one thing inside of there. We just have to unpack it first, but this works. So we have our cell object, right, that has all of these things inside of there. The value of this first one that we're looking at is grade. We could even just skip that because we know that's never going to have a data in there. We could say minimum row equals 2, but this will still work. That would be fine. So we're going to go through this until we find something that did have an F, and it looked like we changed something there. So we're going to go through each row inside of here until we get to the end. I'm just going to skip ahead. Then we're going to save that as our example 06. So mock grades and the active one. So I think active is IS303. It might be 201. I think it's 303. So we have a C minus here, so that should turn into an F. Let's open up this one. Oh, the active sheet was 201. So it did, in fact, change William Miller's grade that was a C minus into an F. Same with Linda Williams and Robert Johnson. So our code is working just fine. But now, that worked for the active sheet. Let's see if we can do it for all of the sheets. And one way we could do that is just to say, hey, for, let's say worksheet object and external workbook dot worksheets. That'll give us all of the worksheets, and we just need to replace this active sheet with that. And if our row always has something inside of it, I could actually get rid of this nested one. Let's go over here. And cell object is actually just going to be row 0. That should work. Just to avoid having too many things nested. I don't want to go much past 3. So let's see if that works. Let me walk through it really briefly so we can think through it. So we're getting our worksheet right here. I'm going to load it in. Then we're going to get each individual worksheet object. So the first worksheet object, that is going to be the, where's our title? Title, IS201. So we're looking at IS201 worksheet. And IS201 has several rows in it. The first row is B1. Okay. So we're going to get the first row. We're going to get the single cell that's inside of it, and we're going to look at its value once we actually get to that point. Let's see, row dot value. So we can actually see what that would look like. Okay, so on this one, row dot value is equal to C minus, so it's going to go in there and change it. Okay. So it's going to do this just the same as what we were doing before, but we eventually are going to get to the next worksheet. So it's just going to repeat that for every single one of the worksheets. I'm going to save it as example 6. Let's make sure we close out of this. Open it back up. And now we should see Fs in all of our worksheets. So we have one there. Accounting 200 didn't have any C minuses, so we're not going to see any there. But we will see it on IS303. Cool. Okay, hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you can just loop through any sheet that you want using openpyxl. Alrighty.